on military matters, but I have been in Iraq several times, and I have sometimes gone around with the U.S. Armed Forces, and I think their conduct there is essentially beyond praise. I used a phrase once which got picked up a bit and played back to me. I said, these are the people in Iraq who are the militia for those who don't have a militia. They're holding the ring and protecting what there is of civil and secular society, and the areas where there is peace and coexistence, from the unbelievably destructive and horrific pornographic effects of the parties of God. I resent what you say about the atrocity count. I think it's remarkable how little of that has been, and how with fairly rigorously, at any rate, not with exemplary rigor perhaps, but with considerable rigor, such instances have been checked out, tracked down and punished. Though I probably would have to agree with you that that could have been done with a bit more severity. On the contractor question, I've got great misgivings. I mean, it won't surprise you. Some of these characters are very good at what they do in providing security and so on, but they're not accountable. We don't have any real oversight over them, and it seems to me, too extraordinarily great an opportunity in a society as imploded and maimed and corrupted as this for corruption. So that gives me pause, I have to say.
Another email, Jim and Maya in Philadelphia. Hello, Mr. Hitchens. Thank you for many things in this opportunity. Our question is as follows. In spite of our newly found adoration for everything Hitchens, we are sincerely troubled by your public statements which you have dismissing global warming, and we wonder how such a great mind is so obviously missing the boat.
I've never made a statement on global warming that I know about. And I don't think anyone wants to hear from me about it. I mean, I have written about the ozone layer question very early on. I wrote a couple of pieces saying, look, this is very important because it does suggest that damage has been done to the biosphere itself, not just the environment. And this would have very grave implications because we'd all be in the same boat here. All the money in the world won't buy you a place for your kid at a school with better ozone than elsewhere. But I mean, steps were taken about the chlorofluorocarbon question, I think it was. The aerosol business, anyway. And it seems that the hole over the ozone layer is to some extent healed, though there are periods over Antarctica where apparently it widens. You see how much I know about this. The argument about global warming, it seems to me, is not whether there is any warming, but whether or not human activity, or to what extent human activity is responsible for it. My line on that is we should act as if it is. For this reason, which I've borrowed from Jonathan Schell's book on the nuclear question, The Fate of the Earth. We don't have another planet on which to run the experiment. We can't find out but one way. And just as we don't have the right to run an experiment in nuclear exchange on this planet, because it doesn't belong to us to that extent, we've no right to run an experiment in warming on it either. And if it turned out to be that there was no severe global warming threat, or that it wasn't man-made, then all we would have done would be make a mistaken analysis, which we could correct for. But if it turned out that there was and we'd done nothing about it, then it would be too late to do anything at all, and that would lead to disaster. I have been told, though, and I'm afraid to say I think it may be true, that the warming is coming now whatever we do. That by the time we found out about the coming rise in temperature, that it was probably on its way. I've heard a lot of people who strongly take the Al Gore thesis, the Al Gore analysis, say that, alas, we're going to find out what it's going to be like no matter what we do.
Yesterday on Encore Book Notes, we ran Peter Hitchens' Book Notes appearance, emailed from John Standish. Your brother Peter spoke briefly about English accents, his accent, and accent as a measure of social status in England. Please comment on English accents and your accent.
Well, George Orwell, to refer to him, once said that everyone in England was branded on the tongue, that you could tell so much about somebody from the moment they opened their mouth, in particular, not just the region of the country they came from, but the social class that they came from, roughly what their parents did or how much money they made. and so on. And though that's true, it's not as true as it used to be. It's still pretty true. And people are very sensitive about it. I know this because my own parents were very sensitive about it and made absolutely sure that I didn't speak as my ancestors had done. So I now speak in what sometimes used to sometimes be called an Oxford accent, sometimes a BBC accent. I hope it's not quite like that. But at any rate, not one that, how shall I put it? Not one that convicts me either of being a sort of hopeless, stuck-up, upper-class twit, or a ground-down nasal adenoidal prole.
Baton Rouge, Louisiana, you're on In Depth with Christopher Hitchens.
Hello, Mr. Hitchens. I have a scary thought, and I wanted to ask you, will we become a theocracy? With our right-wing Christian fundamentalists, we have the prospects of becoming a Christian Taliban. In response to the lady that said, because you grew up in a boarding school, you didn't know God. I grew up in a boarding school, and I do believe in God. So it has nothing to do with the boarding school. But the way we're going in this country, I am very afraid that we will become a theocracy.
No, I think the danger of that is practically zero, especially from the quarter that you mentioned. I mean, these people are a nuisance, of course. The Falwell, Robertson, Wright, and the Haggard lot, and so forth. But they consistently make fools of themselves, and they consistently fail to realize that there just are not enough of them. They don't have. The country is very blessed in this way. No force is strong enough to take it over and monopolize it. In 8 years of having Ronald Reagan quite sympathetic to them, for example, and frequently inviting them to the White House, they got exactly nothing of what they wanted on imposing their form of school prayer on other people, for example, or trying to retard the teaching of science in American schools. The country's too modern for that kind of thing to work. And I'd add another thing, which is that the reason these people went into an eclipse for so long and only started to come back at all in the South in the late 60s and early 70s, is because they did briefly win in the 1920s. They had two big victories. One was the Volstead Act, the prohibition of alcohol nationally. They even got the Constitution changed to suit their attitude to drink. And the second was the Scopes trial, the banning of the teaching of evolution. Mark you, not equal time. They didn't want equal time when they thought they could ban it altogether. Now, they never recovered from these two victories, if you see what I mean. Their victories were the moment of their defeat. They went into eclipse and discredit after that. They would never get that close to being able to influence national policy again, but if they did, it would be the end of them.
Another email, what is Mr. Hitchens' opinion of Noam Chomsky, Chomsky's popularity among the left?
Well, I used to be on quite good terms with Professor Chomsky, and I've reread the stuff of his that I used to admire, in particular an essay he wrote on General Sharon in Lebanon in 1982 or 3, another essay he wrote on the American press and East Timor. And I was rather pleased to find that, though we've since diverged on so many things, that I still thought those were great essays and brilliantly written and brilliantly argued. I don't think he's writing as brilliantly or arguing as well now, and I think it has to do with the impossible task he's set himself of effectively explaining away Islamic jihadism as a function of American policy mistakes. I think he began doing this a little earlier, actually, during the Bosnian Wars, when we first began to disagree, where he almost seemed to write as if the United States was looking to punish the Milosevic regime because it was a gallant socialist exemption to the general trend of globalization and needed to be hauled back into line. I thought anyone who could interpret what was happening in the Balkans that way, where Milosevic was the aggressor so palpably, was losing perspective, and I'm afraid that's what Professor Chomsky has crucially done.
Another email.